All right, can we hear it for the band one more time? Well, good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas. I love this time of year. And not only do I love this time of year, but I love this time of year. And part of the reason for that is because my family is just not very complicated right now. And I say that just because, I know that at some point families get complicated. I mean, that's just what happens, especially around the Christmas time. But right now, when I look at everybody in my immediate family and everybody in my extended family, the greatest thing is that everybody's getting along right now. Nobody's really fighting. Everything's pretty calm. I mean, let me tell you how it is that we usually celebrate Christmas right around this time at my house. Usually on Christmas Eve, once we've gotten past 6 Christmas services, then my side of the family usually comes to one of those Christmas Eve services. And then after that long night, then they usually all meet up at my place where we have Christmas tamales. So if you guys want to come over, you're welcome to come over on that night. Then on Christmas morning, usually we do Andrea's side of the family. So Pastor Chris's family usually comes over. Andrea's parents come over. We unwrap gifts. We have a lot of food. We watch It's a Wonderful Life. It's fantastic, right? And part of the reason why it's so fantastic is not only because we get to do all that stuff, but also because my family is not very complicated right now. And I say that just because I've had some complicated Christmases in the past. Like, for example, when I was in the 6th grade, my sisters were off to their freshman year in college, and I was a 6th grader, so I was just getting ready to bring in a lot of Star Wars action figures that Christmas, when all of a sudden, one of my sisters had written a note home to my parents saying, "I'm running away from home, I'm dropping out of school, I hate you, and I never want to see you again. Please don't ever try and find me." Now, I was hoping that on the back of that note that she had also written, "Just kidding, I'm only failing out of chemistry," but no such luck. That's really the note that she had written. And so as an 11-year-old, my parents left me at home for 24 hours while they went to go and try and find her. And ladies and gentlemen, that was my first exposure to the fact that sometimes that Christmas is not the happiest time of the year. And what's kind of interesting is that not only is that my story, but that's probably somewhat something of your story as well. That what makes Christmas the greatest time of the year is also what kind of makes Christmas the not so wonderful time of the year. And that is the fact that sometimes that Christmas is the great force multiplier. Do you know what I mean by that? That sometimes that Christmas is the great exaggerator. That sometimes Christmas has a tendency to take something kind of good and to make it really, 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 really good. And sometimes what Christmas also has a tendency to do is to take something that's just a little bit bad and to make it really, really, really bad. And what makes Christmas the most wonderful time of the year is also what makes Christmas the not most wonderful time of the year. And that is the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, right around the Christmas time, Christmas can be a crystal clear reminder of the fact that there are problems in life that we just cannot solve. That there are people that we just cannot control. That there are expectations that we can never seem to meet up to. And sometimes when we look in the mirror long enough, what we find is that I am the problem that I cannot solve, that I am the person that I cannot seem to control, and that I'm the one who sets expectations that sometimes other people have trouble meeting. And that's what we want to talk about today. If you have your Bibles, would you turn to John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. Whether you're here or whether you're in the video cafe, would you all stand up with me as we honor the reading of God's word this morning? John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14, it says this: "In the beginning was the Word." What I want to do is I want to go ahead and stop right there because I want to clarify something, that as we talk about the Word, that John is not talking about the Word of God. He's not talking about the Bible, but instead he's actually talking about Jesus. Now, he's actually going to clarify that later in John chapter 1, but I want to go ahead and, make that clear right now. John chapter 1, "In the beginning was the Word." And who was the Word again? The Word was Jesus. Very good. You guys are listening. Fantastic. I love it. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And in him was life, And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent by God whose name was John. And he came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, though. He came only as a witness to that light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. Verse 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of truth and grace. You guys can go ahead and have a seat this morning. I love the Gospel of John. And what I want to do is I want to even explain to you maybe a little bit of something that maybe you didn't even know about the Gospel of John. There are 4 different Gospels in the New Testament. There are 4 different accounts of Jesus' life. And if you know them, go ahead and say them with me. They are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Very good. What you will find is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very, very, very similar. And yet what you will also find is that John's gospel is very, very, very different. And because of this, most biblical scholars believe that the Gospel of John was written much later, after he already knew what was written in Matthew, Mark, Luke. And John, what he was trying to do is he was trying to shed a different perspective on Jesus. He was trying to fill in some different gaps about what was not previously known about Jesus up until that point. Now, John, having written his gospel a little bit later, he was most likely a very old man who had seen some incredibly tragic things in his life. John has experienced up until this point a tremendous amount of loss in his life. He has lost his friends. He has lost his family. He has lost, to a certain extent, his whole culture and society, because John was there when the Roman Empire surrounded the city of Jerusalem and literally starved it out. He was there at the end of the Jewish war in AD 70 when he had either seen or heard stories of the Romans coming in and burning the temple to the ground. Over 1 million Jews were scattered and slaughtered during that time. 200,000 to 300,000 Jewish people flooded the Roman slave markets at that time. And not only did John see this, but John saw his own friends, the Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul, being executed by the Roman Emperor Nero. And yet what I love is this, is that as you and I begin to look inside the beginning, the very beginning of the Gospel of John, even though John had experienced so much bloodshed, and even though he had been through so much loss, what we find still is this, that John had not lost his faith, that he had not stopped believing, that he had not stopped having hope, even in the darkest of times. I mean, John is the one above all people that has the ability to take God and to reduce him down to one word. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, what does John say? John says this right here, that God is love. I mean, that's almost like you and I walking into a final exam. We have an entire blue book to describe God, and John says, I don't really need that. All I have is one word. God is love. That's it. Nailed it. What you're going to find is this, that John's gospel is very unlike Matthew's. John is very unlike Mark. John is very unlike Luke, because as John begins his gospel, John doesn't start with baby shower invitations, doesn't he? He doesn't talk about the baby in the manger. He doesn't talk about Mary and Joseph being betrothed to one another, does he? In fact, John is the only gospel where he does not talk about the birth of Jesus. In the beginning of John, what we find is that John does not talk about the birth narrative at all. And you know what? I think that is absolutely fascinating. Do you know why? Because when Jesus was crucified, and as Jesus was dying on the cross, he makes 7 recorded statements. One of those statements being this statement right here in John chapter 19, verse 26. Remember that John is talking about himself as he says this. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved, John is talking about himself. I love how John loves to refer to himself only as the disciple that Jesus loved. Because all the rest of those guys Jesus didn't really care for. He says this, John chapter 19, verse 26. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And then from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Do you even know that that was in the Bible? Okay, what happens is Jesus is dying on the cross, is he goes to Mary and he says, "Mary, I want you to take John as your son. And John, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take Mary, my mother, as your mother." And guess what? He said that with James, the half-brother of Jesus, and the other son of Mary right there. No wonder why James doesn't come to faith later in life, until later in life, because he's all bitter at his brother. And the Bible says this, that from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. How much time you remember we talked about this last week, how most likely Joseph died as a young father and how Mary was a single parent, most likely for the rest of her life. How much time did John and Mary spend together? We don't really know. All we know is this. John took care of Mary for the rest of her life. Legend has it that John and Mary went to the city of Ephesus after that, where John took care of Mary until her dying day. Now, all I'm trying to say is this, that John, out of all the gospel writers, had the greatest opportunity to say, "Mary, did you know that your baby boy will someday walk on water?" I know, thank you. That was my audition for the Christmas Eve service. No, but what I'm trying to say is this, that John, out of all the disciples, that John, out of everybody, had the greatest opportunity of saying, "You know what, Mary, hey, could you tell me what it was like one more time? Could you tell me what it was like one more time to carry the Son of God? Was he heavy? I mean, what was Jesus like as a toddler? You didn't spank him, did you? I mean, did he ever need to be corrected? Was he correcting you all the time? I mean, Mary, tell me what it was like one more time." And yet, what we find is that absolutely fascinatingly enough is not the case. That when John starts his gospel, John does not talk about the birth of Jesus at all, even though he's in the greatest position to do that. John does not talk about the birth of Jesus. He does not talk about Mary and Joseph. He doesn't talk about donkeys. He doesn't talk about shepherds. He doesn't talk about angels. He doesn't talk about baby boys being massacred. In fact, he does not talk about the birth of Jesus at all. He doesn't talk about the birth of Jesus. Instead, he decides to speak of the very beginning of time. He doesn't talk about the birth of Jesus as much as he wants to talk about and to speak of the very significance of Jesus. And so he says, "You want to know about the beginning? I'll tell you about the beginning. In the beginning was Jesus. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God." And he says this in verses 4 and 5. I love this. "That in him was life, and the life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Now, when we think about darkness, the whole idea of darkness, if we were to have every light in this place go off, all of a sudden, the darkness just kind of represents inconvenience to us, doesn't it? We can't really find our way around. How do I get out of here as quickly as possible? For me, as a father of 5, the darkness is kind of scary for me because I'm afraid I'm going to, get maimed by stepping on a Lego someplace in the house. But what you have to understand is that to the Apostle John, that the darkness did not represent inconvenience, but that the darkness represented utter evil in itself. Here's what you have to understand, that all throughout history, not just in John's time, but all throughout history, what you will find is this, that this world has always tried to treat Christians the way that it treated Christ, and we know how well things worked out for him, don't we? See, again, the Apostle John, he saw Peter killed. The Apostle John, he saw Paul killed. If you believe church history, however reliable you think church history is, they even tried to kill John as the only remaining apostle by throwing him into a vat of boiling oil. And then 10, 15 minutes later, when they went to go check on how crispy brown he was, you know what they found him doing? They found him doing the backstroke. That he was still alive. And what I'm trying to say is this. I'm going to try and light this candle right here just as a little object lesson. Oh, my little thing broke off. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here we go. That at one point, what I'm trying to say is that the Apostle John was the only one left standing. That at one point, the Apostle John was the only one who had not been martyred and killed for his faith. And yet what I'm trying to say is this, that in spite of everything that they tried to do to get rid of the light of Christ, in light of everything that they tried to do to get rid of the light of Christians, in light of everything that they tried to do to get rid of the light of Christmas, John's conclusion is this: the darkness has never been able to overcome it. That as overwhelming and as overcoming as the darkness has always seemed in our life and in our culture and in the world around us, that guess what? That Caesar has never been able to do it. That Tiberius has never been able to do it. That Nero has never been able to do it. That future presidents and administrations will never be able to do it. That markets, economies, and that cancer will never be able to do it. You know, that in spite of every bit of darkness that has always tried to overwhelm the light, that guess what? That the darkness could never overcome it, and that the light would always prevail. What does it say? That in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never been able to overcome it. I love this story about a famous Romanian pastor named Iosif San, who recounted a time when he was being beaten and interrogated by 6 Romanian government officials. And during an early interrogation, he said to an officer who was threatening to kill him, he said this: "Sir, let me explain to you how I see this issue. Your supreme weapon is killing, and my supreme weapon is dying. And here's how it works. You know that my sermons on tape have spread all over the country, and if you kill me, those sermons will be sprinkled with my blood. And everyone will know that I died for my preaching, and all of a sudden everyone's going to pick up a tape and say, I better listen to that man again because he really meant it. He sealed that with his life. So, sir, I will actually rejoice in the supreme victory if you kill me, because my sermons will now speak 10 times louder than they have before." And he says this, that after I said this, the interrogator uncuffed me and said, "Well, if you want us to kill you, then we aren't going to be so foolish as to fulfill your wish." And he said this, I stopped to consider the meaning of that statement. And I remembered how for many years I wanted so badly to live that I'd wasted my life in inactivity. But now that I placed my life on the altar and decided that I was ready to die for the gospel, now they were telling me they would not kill me. And here's what I realized, that as long as I tried to save my life, I was losing it. Now that I was willing to lose it, that I found it. In other words, translation, what is he saying? That the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Many of you know the Scheller family. I'm going to go ahead and show a picture of them. The Scheller family is a family that's very near and dear to our very near and dear to our church. The Schellers are a great family in our church, not only because, Aaron, you've probably seen him serve with the band. Shannon, a lot of times she's, working with our children's ministry. They're a great family in our church, not only because they've been with our church, serving ever since the first day we ever had service 9 years ago. But Aaron and Shannon, they're actually the first couple who ever met and married at VantagePoint. In fact, Shannon had just come through a bit of a difficult relationship, and Aaron was like, "Who is that girl over there?" So he goes to Rosemary, who's Shannon's mom. She's one of the ushers, if you don't know who Rosemary is. And he goes, "Man, your daughter is hot," which is a little creepy. And he says, "Rosemary, would it be a little bit too soon if I asked your daughter out?" She goes, "Absolutely not. You should. Time's a ticking, boy. You need to go and ask her out as quickly as you can." So they got married a number of years ago. This is their family. Their youngest one right there, their daughter is named Paisley. Now, Paisley is 2 years old. She's about to turn 3 years old on Tuesday. And just a little bit ago, they just found a little bit of a bump on her right temple. Now, they thought, what's the big deal? It's just a little bit of a bump. I mean, kids get bumps all the time. And what they noticed is that bump never seemed to go away. So they took Paisley over to the doctor, and the doctor said, "No, that seems to be a tumor that's eroding her skull. But we don't know if it's malignant or benign, so let's go ahead and remove it and biopsy it." And so they did that. She had to undergo surgery right after Thanksgiving. They're right about to celebrate her 3rd birthday on Tuesday, and they just got the news from the doctor. Little Paisley has a rare and aggressive form of cancer. So pray for the Scheller family. She has to undergo chemo in just a little bit. But I had a chance to talk to the Schellers just a couple days ago. I said, "So how are you guys doing?" And I said, "Well, we've been better." And then I asked them the question that we're talking about right here. I said, "You guys know this. You have a 3-year-old daughter that has cancer." And so I asked them, "Yeah, you guys are Christians, so how do you guys process this? How do you find hope? How do you choose hope?" In fact, even on their Christmas card, I think the tagline says, "Choose joy in all seasons." So I asked them that question. How do you do that? How do you choose joy in all seasons? And ultimately, their answer kind of boiled down to this. She said, "I've read the end of the book, and I know that God wins." And this is probably a horrible analogy, but I said, that's the same reason why I hate chick flicks. I hate all chick flicks. I mean, with the exception of the movie Aliens, I would say that I hate all chick flicks. And why is that? Why do I hate all chick flicks? Because you know how the story is going to end, right? You know that the guy's going to get together with the girl. And so no matter what happens in the story, no matter if he gets called off to war, no matter if he becomes a ghost, no matter if... horrible time to make jokes. No matter if she gets amnesia, I never feel all that nervous. I never feel all that much fear or trepidation. You know why? Because I know how the story ends. And if that's the case with chick flicks, then you know what? That's the case with our lives. That no matter how much fear that we go through, that no matter how much uncertainty we may feel, that no matter how dark Christmas may get, because as happy as Christmas gets as well, there's a bit of a darkness, there's a bit of a sadness to life in Christmas, isn't there? And yet the hope that we ultimately hang on to as Christians is this: that one day, that's still. That good will never triumph over evil. That justice will never triumph over injustice. Sadness will never overcome joy. That the darkness will never, ever be able to completely overcome the light. Because this is what we know. We've all read the end of the book, and if you haven't, I'll go ahead and spoil it for you. God wins. And that everything turns out okay. So what I'm trying to say is this. So at Christmas time when we're confronted, maybe like no other time of year, at Christmas when we're confronted with problems that we can't solve, maybe that you were a problem that you cannot solve, or that you were a problem that other people cannot solve. When you are confronted with the fact that there are people that you cannot control, that no matter how much you try and explain things, that no matter how much you try and rationalize things, that no matter how much you try and reason with the other person, that there's another person that you cannot control, that no matter how much you try and meet up to somebody's expectations or someone else tries to meet up to yours, that as dark as this world gets, this is what we know, that Jesus is the light of the world, and that there's a reason to have hope, that there's a reason to believe, that there's a reason to get up and to take that next step, not because of what it is that's happening around us, but ultimately because of what it is that happened 2,000 years ago when Jesus stepped into this world. Because John says this, that in him was the light of all mankind. And that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Not then, not now, not ever. Why don't you bow your heads and pray with me?